When we ask which nation is smarter, it's not about an innate intellectual superiority, but rather the effectiveness and equity of their educational systems. If Canada and the US were to form a single North American superpower, their differing educational philosophies would create a fascinating and, at times, intensely contentious integration. What's particularly striking is how certain parts of the US would fare in comparison to their northern neighbors. The classroom. Today, a tale of two systems and two Americas. In the United States, education is a vast, decentralized tapestry, with funding and governance largely handled at the state and local levels. This fragmented approach, heavily reliant on local property taxes, creates stark disparities. Wealthy suburban districts often boast state-of-the-art facilities, advanced curricula, and highly paid teachers, while struggling urban or rural areas might lack basic resources. Standardized tests like the SAT and ACT play a major role in college admissions, and high school sports are practically a cultural institution. At the higher education level, the U.S. is globally renowned for its elite research universities. Harvard, MIT, Stanford, and countless others consistently top international rankings. These institutions are powerhouses of innovation and research, attracting talent worldwide. However, this excellence comes at a significant cost. U.S. university tuition is notoriously high, leading to a pervasive student debt crisis. For a four-year public university, annual out-of-state tuition can average around $29,000, while private institutions easily exceed $40,000. Many American graduates shoulder a median student loan debt of approximately $37,000 to $40,000. Within this U.S. landscape, there's a discernible pattern. Blue states, states tending to vote Democrat, often outpace red states, states tending to vote Republican in educational attainment and outcomes. Blue states generally invest more per pupil, have higher rates of college graduates, and boast more top-ranked universities. For example, Massachusetts consistently ranks as a top-educated state, excelling in both educational attainment and quality, compared to many southern or Mountain West states that frequently fall lower on such metrics. Tuition costs also tend to be higher in blue states, reflecting, in part, the higher cost of living and potentially more robust university funding. Canada, conversely, operates a more centralized and publicly funded system. Education is primarily a provincial responsibility, leading to more consistent standards and equitable funding within each province. K-12 education is almost entirely publicly funded, reducing disparities tied to local property values. While extracurriculars are valued, they generally don't carry the same hyper-competitive weight seen south of the border. Canadian higher education is also highly regarded internationally, with institutions like the University of Toronto, McGill, and UBC consistently ranking among the global elite. The crucial difference lies in the cost. Tuition fees for domestic students at Canadian universities are significantly lower, typically ranging from CAD $7,000 to $10,000 per year for undergraduate programs. This public funding model makes higher education far more accessible, resulting in considerably less student debt, with the average Canadian bachelor's degree holder accumulating around CAD $28,000 in student debt. Academic achievement, the numbers game. When we compare academic performance on international benchmarks like the OECD's Program for International Student Assessment, PISA, which tests 15-year-olds in reading, mathematics, and science, Canada consistently holds a discernible edge over the United States. In the PISA 2022 results, Canada's overall score was 1519, placing it ahead of the United States at 1468. Specifically, reading, Canada scored 507, while the U.S. scored 504. Science, Canada scored 515, while the U.S. scored 499. Mathematics, Canada scored 497, while the U.S. scored 465. While both countries perform above the OECD average in some areas, Canada's more equitable funding model and less fragmented curriculum are often cited as reasons for its more consistent performance across all student demographics. The U.S. often shows a wider distribution of scores, with a smaller proportion of very high performers, but also a larger proportion of very low performers, particularly in states with lower educational investment. For example, provinces like Quebec consistently rank among the world's best in math, a level of consistent top performance not matched by any U.S. state. Furthermore, data from the Program for the International Assessment of Adult Competencies, PIAAC, also shows that Canada generally boasts higher average scores in adult literacy and numeracy compared to the US, and a smaller proportion of adults at the lowest proficiency levels. Canada also holds the distinction of being the only nation where more than half of all adults have a tertiary education, college or university degree, a higher rate than the US. What are advantages for the new superpower? And for former Canadians? Expanded academic resources. The combined entity would possess an unparalleled wealth of research facilities, faculty talent, and academic programs, creating immense opportunities for collaboration. Imagine a shared genius pool between the University of Toronto and MIT, a visionary might declare. Innovation and specialization. Greater scale could foster deeper specialization in niche fields, leading to new breakthroughs and unique educational pathways. Talent flow. Easier movement of students and educators across the former border could lead to a more dynamic and competitive academic landscape. Disadvantages for the new superpower and for former Canadians. Cost shock for Canadians. This is the undisputed champion of potential resentment. Canadians deeply value their affordable public university tuition. Integrating into the U.S. model with its reliance on high tuition fees would fundamentally change the accessibility of higher education. Imagine a Canadian student expecting a CAD $8,000 annual tuition, suddenly facing a $40,000-plus bill. This is not just a financial burden. It's a perceived betrayal of a core national value. So we get to pay American prices for our education, but we don't necessarily get a better education than what we already had? Makes sense. Dilution of public system. The U.S.'s more market-driven approach could erode Canada's public education ethos, potentially leading to less equitable access and widening educational gaps, particularly concerning the already underperforming red states, which would now be compared directly to formerly Canadian provinces. Curriculum clashes. Harmonizing diverse curricula, especially given the U.S.'s state-level autonomy versus Canada's provincial control, would be a political quagmire. Would history textbooks need to be entirely rewritten? Would social studies now include learning all 50 U.S. state capitals plus Canadian provinces? And how would Quebec's French-language educational system fit into this English-dominant landscape? The epicenter of resentment, the education cost chasm. The greatest amount of resentment would undoubtedly stem from the disparity in educational costs, particularly at the post-secondary level. For Canadians, affordable, publicly accessible higher education isn't just a policy, it's a fundamental right and a source of immense national pride. They have largely avoided the crippling student debt crisis that plagues the U.S. When the two systems merge, the harsh reality of U.S. higher education costs would crash down on former Canadian students and their families. This wouldn't be just a financial burden, it would be a profound cultural shock and a source of deep-seated anger. Canadians, accustomed to a system that prioritizes access regardless of income, would likely view this as a significant step backward, especially as they'd be asked to subsidize a system where some of the lowest-performing red states might now be their educational peers, rather than their often superior Canadian provinces. In essence, while the theoretical advantages of a unified North American education system might seem appealing, the practical realities of merging two fundamentally different funding models, coupled with deeply ingrained cultural values around accessibility and public good, would guarantee that the classroom would become a battleground of resentment. And ironically, the very states in the U.S. that most need an educational uplift might find themselves bearing the brunt of the financial and cultural friction from their newly acquired, academically competitive, and publicly minded neighbors. That was fun! Like and subscribe and keep the conversation going in the comments. There's more to come!